I cornered James, my older son, in the hall outside his bedroom and said, "Was there ever a moment when you really needed me and I didn't come? Because I was working." He looked at me and then he looked at the floor for a long time, like a long, awkward period of time. And I thought he was about to really let me have it. And he finally looked up and said, "There probably were, but I can't remember any of them. And also, can I have some money for Chipotle?" I thought, okay, I can't have done too terribly in all of this. If you can't even remember any of my many, many mistakes, we're doing all right. And yes, you may have $20 for Chipotle.
From NCPR, North Country Public Radio, this is Northwards, a show about people, places, and ideas that have to do with the North Country and beyond, or maybe just people you should know. I'm Mitch Teich.
Support for the Northwards podcast comes from the J.C. Steiniger and M.E. McDonald Charitable Fund at Adirondack Foundation in support of the Adirondack Foundation, building stronger Adirondack communities. I wish I hadn't cracked my seltzer. I could have cracked my seltzer on the air. On the air.
You could take the Nestea plunge.
The what?
You're so young.
The Nestea plunge?
Yes, the Nestea plunge. Do you not know the Nestea plunge?
No.
Okay, so Nestea, it's a brand of iced tea,
Yeah,
right?
I've had it, yeah.
Yeah, for years, I'm talking probably more than a decade, their whole ad campaign centered around taking a sip of an ice-cold Nestea was like, on a hot day, it was like falling backwards into a pool.
So
And they refer to it as the Nestea plunge.
not too dissimilar from Klondike Bar, where you take a bite and suddenly you're on the top of a mountain.
Yes, absolutely.
What's the toothpaste equivalent of that?
It's Topol, the smoker's tooth polish. And also the name of an actor who was in Fiddler on the Roof.
His name is Topol, the smoker's
No, his name was
That's
just
his
Topol.
full legal name.
I think he
a
had
good name.
nothing to do with the smoker's tooth polish.
Somehow he couldn't get an endorsement from that company. Have they gone under? Does that exist anymore?
I don't think it exists anymore.
See this ugly yellow stain? That's what comes from cigar or cigarette smoke. Just think what smoking a pack a day, every day, could do to your teeth. But look, here's Topol, the smoker's tooth polish that helps remove all kinds of superficial tobacco stains. Topol, the smoker's tooth polish, regular or with fluoride.
Oh, I guess they did have a fluoride version. Regular. Regular or with fluoride. Regular as though, like what it has had with soap.
Welcome to Northwards. I'm leaving this in.
We should do something with that. I don't know what, but
I'm going to leave it in. That's what we're going to do with it. It's funny.
it is funny. I don't know that it has a lot to do with our guest this week. As far as I know, she's not a smoker. Hey, Ethan.
Hi, Mitch.
Ethan Shanty is with us. He is the producer, and he joins us at the beginning of Northwards, and we talk about stuff. And today we're going to talk a little bit about journaling. I don't keep a journal.
I sort of do. I go back and forth, but I have been keeping a journal of one very specific part of my life, which is for the last couple of years, I have been booking concerts with the St. Lawrence County Arts Council in Potsdam. And starting in January of 25, we started a monthly series. So we're doing the first Friday of every single month. And I realized shortly before this all kicked off that I have a pretty bad memory of like my musical career. I was talking with a friend who I started playing music with when I was like 13 or 14, and we were trying to like piece together the timeline of our musical career together. And, you know, I thought certain things happened here and he thought they happened there. And we were trying to remember all the bands that came through town and all the bands that stayed over at our houses and all of that kind of stuff. And we just couldn't remember 90% of it because when you're in the moment, you know, you think it's going to last forever because you're a stupid kid. You know, I didn't keep like any of the flyers. I don't have most of the CDs left. And so when I started doing these First Friday shows, I thought I need to keep an accurate record of this because I'm going to want to look back on it. And also I want to improve every single time I do it. And the only way to do that is to keep it at the front of mind and take stock of what you've done right and what you've done wrong and what you can improve on. So that's what I've been journaling for the last couple of months here. I've enjoyed it immensely.
Not me. My life is ethereal. No, actually, you know, if push came to shove and you asked, do I keep a journal? I do not keep a journal where I consciously write down things that happen.
Have you ever?
No, no, not really. I mean, I tried doing it. My wife and I took a trip to Scandinavia in 2002, and I brought a tiny instant camera to be able to add little photographs. I mean, I brought a full-on camera as well, but I thought I could, keep a journal of it and include little pictures along the way. And I think I got halfway through the trip and I probably stopped. But what I've done for years. I mean, here in my job at North Country Public Radio, I mean, I do write a weekly column, and quite frequently that column reflects on something that has happened to me that week or recently or thinking back on how something that's going on in the world is reflected in my own history. And it's not the first column I've written. I kept a blog back in the early days of the blogosphere, and before that, I actually wrote a magazine column when I lived in Arizona. It was a monthly column, but it did a lot of the same things. And even before that, when I was in college and when I was in high school, I wrote a humor column for my college paper, and before that, my high school newspaper.
So your life isn't like totally ethereal. If you had access to all of those columns, you could go back and see what your life was like. But I think for most people, obviously journaling used to be way more common, but now I think people
scrapbooking. Now it's scrapbooking.
Now it's scrapbooking, of course. But I think people have like replaced that with Facebook and Instagram updates and Twitter and whatever. And that's not really me. I've never been super into sharing the intimate details of my personal life for the entire world to see. When I was younger, maybe a little bit more, but certainly not now. As I've become a more public person with radio and shows and publishing and stuff, I have sought out to be like more private as possible.
Well, and I think there's a difference between what we're willing to tell the world in a Facebook post,
right,
even if it seems like the intimate details of our life, and what we're willing to tell ourselves when we write a journal for our own sake, without the thought that it'll be published someday,
right,
unless we become president and it becomes part of our public papers.
Yeah, or you become Kurt Cobain and people want to mine your personal life for monetary gain after you've died.
Well, I fully expect that to be the case with me someday. But why are we having this conversation anyway?
So you're talking with Mary Louise Kelly, who did keep a journal and she published it.
Yeah, and the book is not written like a journal, but
Dear Diary, right. Today we had pizza.
But it is a kind of blow-by-blow description with a lot of reflection on other parts of her life. She basically decided to write a memoir in real time over the course of a year. She called the book It Goes So Fast, which doesn't necessarily just refer to that one year. But, I think for those of us who are of a similar age to Mary Louise Kelly, we start to realize that each year is a smaller and smaller proportion of our life.
Right, exactly, yeah.
And that's true whether you're 2 years old or 56 years old.
But it takes you a couple decades to realize that that's what's happening, Like when I turned like 25, I was like, it's winter again? We just had winter. What is going on? But of course, like
damn you seasons.
Yeah, lousy March weather. But when you're young, summer lasts forever.
And when you're 56 or 51 or maybe 37, you can you start to think about how we look back at our lives differently than when you're 12. Mm-hmm. Because 6 years ago, when you're 12, that's half your life. 6
right.
years ago, I was 50 years old, and it doesn't feel like that much difference. But when I put it into the context of somebody else's 6 years, there is a lot that can take place in any period of time. And so in this case, Mary Louise Kelly wrote about this 1 year in her life, and it's subtitled The Year of No Do-Overs. Partly for the things that she was going through and realizing that, she had one chance to do some things. One of her sons was about to graduate from high school, and there were some other big picture things that were happening in her life. And we'll talk about them in this conversation that we have. Mary Louise Kelly joined us from Washington. Thank you so much.
Mitch, my total pleasure. Thank you for having me.
So it has been a couple of years since this book first came out in hardcover, and 3 years since the year of no do-overs.
Yes.
When you go back to this book today, how do you feel that the reckoning you did in writing the book shapes the Mary Louise Kelly of 2025?
Such a good question to kick us off with. And I have to say, I'm so glad that I wrote it. I look back and I decided 3 years ago to write a year in real time as it unfolded. It's only 3 years. It's such a short window in the grand scheme of things. And I look back and I'm like, oh, yeah, I forgot all about that. I forgot that moment. I forgot that conversation. I couldn't recount that with absolute accuracy today. It's already fading into the past. And I will say the update since I wrote my older son's senior year of high school, as he's now a junior in college, and my younger one is now off to college. I have an empty nest. And it really does go so fast. And I'm grateful that I wrote it. I say that, and I keep thinking, I wish I had done more of capturing, we all do a good job of capturing birthdays and big holiday celebrations and all the, cute posed family portraits at high school graduation, all of that. I wish I had captured more of the moments of them sprawled on the floor during homework. Or taken more photos of them burning the toast. It's just the little things, pulling out of the driveway in the moment, because those are the things that, looking back, are the ones that I miss, and that will stick with me.
Yeah, my daughter is halfway through her senior year of college, and my son is
Wow.
a junior in high school, and I'm thinking exactly the same thing. So you mentioned your kids, for the as fast and as furious as the year came for you, it came really fast and furious for them as well. I mean, it was a watershed year for their high school soccer team. They lost their grandfather. There
Yeah.
was their parents' marriage teetering. Do you imagine they might have their own books to write about that year someday?
Oh, I sure hope so. I sure hope so. They're both good writers, so I would look forward to reading that. It's funny, read they were required to read. It first invited and then mandated that they read the chapters in which they figure prominently, because this is my story, but in telling it, I have to tell some of theirs. And I wanted them to read and make sure they were okay with what I was sharing. They had veto power. They vetoed some chapters that I would have loved to put out in the world, and they were like, "Yeah, not that story, Mom. keep that one. Maybe now that you've written it, could we not burn it, and we will never speak of this again." So that is a long way of saying I suspect that they would have a very different version of what mattered and how things went down that year. One of the moments that I capture in the book that kind of sums this up is I'm a journalist. I'm a reporter. I like to report things when I have a question and actually try to gather some facts. So when I was trying to figure out, the central question of the book of am I doing okay at being a good mom while trying to be a good journalist and good at my work at the same time, I cornered James, my older son, in the hall outside his bedroom and said, was there ever a moment when you really needed me and I didn't come because I was working? And he looked at me and then he looked at the floor for a long time, like a long, awkward period of time. And I thought he was about to really let me have it. And he finally looked up and said, there probably were, but I can't remember any of them. And also, can I have some money for Chipotle? I thought, okay, like, I can't have done too terribly in all of this. If that's, if you can't even remember any of my many, many mistakes, we're doing all right. And yes, you may have $20 for Chipotle.
It's probably only 5 years of therapy he'll have to go through, right?
Indeed, exactly.
You devote basically a full chapter of this book to what I guess could politely be called a run-in with then Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, in which he was unhappy about being asked about Ukraine and basically tried to ambush you first in front of his staff in his office and then in the media afterwards. I think it was then NPR President John Lansing who described it as an effort to intimidate. For as public as this particular effort became, Do you go into your work any differently today than you did before that interview?
No, I don't think so. I mean, my goal then and now is to ask tough questions of our public officials in the service of trying to figure out what they're thinking and why, and what decisions they are making in the name of the United States, certainly in the case of the Secretary of State, our nation's top diplomat, and in the service of holding them to account. And that's the job. That was the job then. That is the job now. It's what gives you courage in a situation like that that goes in a totally unexpected direction. I expected to show up at the State Department that day and question the Secretary of State about Iran and Ukraine, and we did that. I did not expect to be given a map pop quiz asking if I could find Ukraine on an unmarked map, but that's what happened. I didn't expect the Secretary of State to issue a statement on State Department letterhead calling me a liar, but that's what happened. Subsequent emails that I released showing the correspondence with his office held up our version of events. But no, I think the thinking carefully about what I want to know from an interview, what questions are important to ask, being really prepared, because by definition, you walk into an interview like that and the person in question knows more about the subject than you do. And then pushing when you get an answer that feels incomplete or misleading or in contradiction with the facts. So that then, as now, remains the assignment.
You also write candidly about, and I don't know if coming to terms is the best way to put it, but maybe just dealing with your hearing loss. And I know that problem predates the particular year you chronicle, but I get the sense because so much was going on that year, would it have brought into sharp relief the risk of missing things?
Oh, yeah. Yes, by way of background, I have severe to profound hearing loss in both ears. I'm talking to you right now, wearing hearing aids, both ears. I anchor All Things Considered every evening, wearing hearing aids in both ears. Couldn't function without them. The development in the 2-3 years that have intervened since I first sat down to write this book is that my hearing continues to get a little bit worse every year. In my latest checkup, the audiologist said we're past the limits of what I can fully correct with hearing aids. So we'll start looking at what the next options are. And I had a moment, it was a few months ago now, but it was the first time I was at a yoga class, a hot yoga class, when they heat the room to 98 degrees or something so that you will sweat and cleanse yourself as you're doing the yoga. But it means it's tough to wear hearing aids because they're not supposed to get wet. So the whole class is basically silent to me. I'm just going into down dog when other people around me do. I can't hear much. And at the end, there were two women talking right next to me, like on the mats, right next to me. And I could hear that they were speaking, and I couldn't even make out what language it was. We're in Washington. There's a lot of people speaking a lot of different languages. And I thought, I can't even tell if they're speaking English. I'm literally not getting a single word of this conversation in normal level voices right next to me. So it's an evolving thing. And I keep figuring out small modifications I need to make to my work to continue being able to do it. And so far, so good. And knock on wood that technology continues to advance at a faster rate than my hearing loss.
I think I read an interview you once gave where you were concerned about just what you just described about not being able to perceive the language. And, on a personal level, the light bulb went off for me, and I recognized that phenomenon so clearly that I decided maybe it was time to get my hearing checked. And I'll say, and I took the hearing aids out to do this interview because I haven't figured out how to keep them from feeding back inside the headphones.
Well, I have advice for you on that once we. Okay. But that brings me joy. If some tiny piece of that message hit home, and I hope improved your life and improved your ability to carry on and do the work and engage fully with everybody around you, that is so great to hear.
Absolutely, yes. One, I guess, final question to tie this all together. As this paperback comes out and people have a chance to read about this part of this act of your life, can you give them a status update? How are you doing?
Oh, let's see. I get a little harder of hearing every day. I walk past my son's now empty, utterly pristine, clean bedrooms every day, and it's like a knife to my heart. I open the fridge every night, and all the food that I left in there the day before is still there, uneaten. It's miraculous. I wake up occasionally on a Saturday morning, and for the first time in 20 years where every waking moment was spent driving to godforsaken soccer fields in the back of Beyond because my sons both played from the day they could walk. I wake up on a Saturday morning and think, what will I do today? How shall I pass the time? That's literally not a thought that ever crossed my mind for the last 2 decades. And it turns out the answers to those questions include more time with friends and like maybe throwing a dinner party once in a while or having more time to write the next thing and just go outside and take a long walk and I don't have to do it on a soccer field somewhere. And it turns out I miss every second of my boys being small and also that life is pretty darn great.
Well, Mary Louise Kelly, I hope life continues to be great, and I hope we'll talk again soon.
Mitch Teich, I will look forward to it. Thank you.
Mary Louise Kelly is the co-host of All Things Considered on NPR. She's also author of a couple of spy novels and of the memoir called It Goes So Fast, which comes out in paperback on April 8th. You can read more about her work and see a photo or two at ncpr.org/northwards.
Wait, spy novels?
She has written a couple of spy novels, which I am ashamed to say I have not read, but they emerge from her work, as a defense correspondent.
Oh, that makes a lot of
doing
sense.
all sorts of things in all sorts of interesting places. And I gather she just has a lot of fun writing them.
Cool.
I interviewed her a few years ago. In fact, if you go to ncpr.org/northwards, you'll actually see a picture of the two of us. That is not from the interview you just heard. That is from an interview I did in the last month or so that I lived in Milwaukee when I was working at the public radio station there, and I did an interview with her on stage there. And if memory serves, we talked a lot about the spy novels at that point because she had just had one that was either just coming out or had just come out or something like that. But this latest book, it's been out in hardcover for a couple of years, but the paperback is just coming out.
Awesome. I had a thought about journaling. I realized, that I actually did keep a long form journal when I was a kid. My mom was moving from the North Country out to Phoenix, Arizona after my dad passed. And, obviously she's going through all the things that she doesn't want anymore. And there was a ton of stuff in my childhood bedroom that I had not taken. So it's books and it's posters and it's CDs and whatever. And then I discovered this Ziploc bag full of ephemera. And one of the things was not not a ream of paper, but 20 or 30 pages that were printed off from a WordPad doc on the family computer. And it was the most embarrassing stuff in the world. I was ashamed to have read it. I was I was kind of a little jerk when I was a teenager. And it was just all of these.
Weren't we all, though?
Yeah, we all definitely were. And, there's these screeds against people that I didn't like and conflicts that I was having with girlfriends.
The Ethan Shanty Manifesto.
I wouldn't go so far as to call it a manifesto, but it was actually, it was embarrassing. I was thank God no one else is going to read this. I do think that I threw it away. Maybe I burned it even to ensure that nobody would pick it out of the pile at the dump. But it was also nice because I realized you live in your own head all day, your entire life, and you go through these incremental changes and you don't realize how significantly you've changed and become a different person. So it was nice to see I don't hold on to that kind of stuff anymore. It was actually nice to revisit. I guess that's why journaling is important.
Someday I'll share the mystery novel I wrote when I was 13 years old.
What was your spy's name?
Trevor Storm.
Really?
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I still have the original manuscript someplace, handwritten.
Wow. Michael Scott would be proud. Threat level midnight.
Threat level midnight. Yeah, exactly. Ethan, besides Trevor Storm, who brings us this show every week?
Northwards is an NCPR podcast production. The show is written, produced, and edited by Mitch Teich with digital production supervision by me. I'm Ethan Shanty. To find out more about this show, listen to more conversations, and to support Northwards, head to ncpr.org/Northwards. This is NCPR, North Country Public Radio.